Senator Walsh.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Three fairly brief questions. First of all, just to thank the clarity with which we've got answers from the group, the delegation before us. My first question is to do with the C case, which was what has it here, of course, in relation to the ECHR decision. And the evidence before that court was that the woman had been undergoing chemotherapy for cancer, I think, for 3 years, and then went into remission and subsequently became unintentionally pregnant. Can I just ask, in those circumstances, say Ms. C, or indeed another woman presenting herself to you in those circumstances, what treatment would you have afforded her in that position? My second question, probably directed to Dr. Mahony, who's been particularly strong, I think, in relation to the need for legislation. Would you explain, how, in your opinion, legislation should be designed and what impact it might have on current medical practice? Or would legislation underpinning current medical practice be satisfactory? Or what additions would you want added to it? And if you could give clinical examples in your answer, it would be helpful to us. My final question is in relation to the Offence Against the State Act and changing it. Would you feel that any changes or any repeal of the Act should also include a duty of care to the baby? Emphasis has been made about doctors deserving legal protection, which I don't disagree with. Mothers should also obviously be protected. I think everybody would subscribe to that. But should the baby also be afforded some protection in law?
Senator Walsh, thank you. Senator Vanabachik.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd also like to just thank the three presenters very much for their really strong presentations and the clarity you've given us, particularly on the issues of time limits and on the issues of the chilling effect, I think, as the European Court of Human Rights described it, of the 1861 Act and the lack of legal clarity upon current medical practice. And I think you've, particularly Dr. Coulter-Smith and Dr. Mahony, have really testified to that. I just wanted to ask a particular, specific question about the drafting of legislation in terms of the assessment of risk. And I think, Dr. Mahony, you've been very clear that in an emergency, one opinion should be sufficient. And I think that's the view expressed in the expert group report in Chapter 6.2. In a non-emergency situation, it appears from the expert group report, they certainly envisage 2 opinions. Should it be 2 obstetricians? Should it be 1 obstetrician and 1 other doctor? And in the case of suicide risk, should it be an obstetrician and a psychiatrist? Again, they weigh up different advantages and disadvantages. It's not quite clear from the report which is best in their opinion. It seems to me they're coming down on the side of an obstetrician plus 1 other. That would be the normal process. And I wonder, I'd just be interested in your specific views on that.
Deputy Tobin.
I can't hear. Most of the questions I wanted to ask have been asked, but just the final question would be that from the 3 professionals that have given their presentations today, would those views be representative of their professional colleagues, or would there be, I suppose, in that group of colleagues that they have many different views held?
And very briefly, Senator Healy-Ames, you indicated very briefly.
One final question for Dr. McCaffrey. You spoke about consulting many of your colleagues around the country and about 280 years of experience, and that you were unable to identify any consultant who met a woman wishing to terminate a pregnancy due to suicide. Given that many of them have also practiced abroad, did you establish if this was their experience in other jurisdictions where abortion is legal?
Thank you. Dr. McCaffrey, you want to start maybe?
That was their opinion, having practiced abroad. In all of their clinical experience and clinical practice, they hadn't met a woman who had suicidal intent or ideation purely because she was pregnant. That was just a group of 12 consultants. With regard to the 2 signatories, in my presentation and the people I spoke to, nobody felt it was appropriate for an obstetrician to have an opinion on suicide. We felt we weren't specialist trained in psychiatry, and we felt that that really was the remit of psychiatrists to do. So nobody felt that they would be comfortable making a diagnosis of suicide as an obstetrician.
Dr. Coulter-Smith.
Just in relation to mental health issues, both in pregnancy and following pregnancy, I think we said earlier on that the incidence of mental health issues in pregnancy is approximately 10 to 15%. And the risk of suicide in pregnancy is extraordinarily low. We all know that women can suffer from postnatal depression, and the risk of suicide is still there following pregnancy. And it's my belief that the risk of suicide can increase a little bit postnatally, but I think that is a question that you could explore in a little bit more detail with our psychiatric colleagues later on today. In terms of the question on a specific case of cancer, I think each case of cancer is dealt with on its own merits. Each one will have a particular set of circumstances. Whether somebody has had cancer before in remission and got pregnant again, you deal with each situation as it arises, and you provide the most appropriate treatment for the patient at the time. In terms of the assessment of risk in the emergency and non-emergency situation, it's my understanding that what the Institute have suggested is that there should be 2 obstetricians involved in the decision as to whether a patient requires to have their pregnancy interrupted, plus the expertise of the appropriate specialty. If it's a mental health issue, then obviously it's going to be a psychiatrist. If it's a cardiac issue, then it'll be a team of cardiologists. But it would involve input from both obstetrics and from the allied, the other specialty.
And Dr. Mahony.
And then finally, again, just addressing the issue. So suicide, between 2009 and 2011, 2 women took their own life during pregnancy in this country. We may never know, and I don't think we can ever answer truthfully whether in these cases termination of pregnancy would have saved those lives. We are once again never dealing with absolute certainties. But what I am saying is I believe as a doctor that we cannot dismiss it. And when a woman feels that she is going to take her life during pregnancy, she needs to be treated in totality. I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that termination of pregnancy cures suicide ideation, but it might just be appropriate in a very tiny percentage of women. Therefore, we must not dismiss it, and we must be guided by our expert colleagues in the area of psychiatry. I agree with Dr. Coulter-Smith on the issue of cancer. There are many different types of cancer. There will be different risks, different chances of recurrence, and we again need to be guided by our oncology colleagues in this regard. And again, in terms of the whole issue of, legislation, and just without harping on again, but I still contend that abortion in this country is a criminal offence under the 1861 Offence Against the Person Act 58 and 59. It remains a criminal offence. In regard to regulation, I believe that there will always be, where we have the opportunity, 2 doctors, 2 obstetricians involved in any decision to terminate a pregnancy where there are direct obstetric complications. I agree with Dr. Coulter-Smith and indeed the Institute that where additional expertise is required, for example, psychiatric expertise, cardiology expertise, at least one other doctor who is on the specialist register and who is an expert in that field should be involved in the decision-making process. I don't believe any doctor wants to make these decisions on our own. It is how we practice medicine, is to get as much opinion as we can, to get the appropriate opinion that we can, and we very much practice in teams. This is no new concept to doctors in this country to work together as a team and to seek each other's opinion. But I believe it is absolutely right that these decisions, where possible, should not be made in isolation and should be made by the appropriate team who have the appropriate expertise. So just to sum up, we just want to do our job, but we want to be legally protected to do so.
Thank you. Sorry, Deputy Senator. Sorry, Senator Wild. Sorry.
But do a very specific
Show respect to the chair and the witnesses, please. If you have a question, indicate, please. Sorry, if you stand, please.
Yes, sorry.
Show a bit of courtesy to the chair and to the members.
Sorry,
witnesses going in, please.
Okay. And I don't want to delay the meeting, Chairman, and thank you indeed for absolutely. Thank you for affording me opportunity. I put 2 very specific questions. First one was in relation to the legislation. What changes do you think legislation should engender in current medical practice, in your opinion? Or should it in fact legislate for any particular changes? And the second question is, with regard to the Offences Against the State Act, if it's repealed, the Persons Act, sorry, if it's repealed, should there be some protection there or duty of care to the unborn in any new legislation that would repeal the current Act?
Thanks, Senator.
Your questions are probably better put to the legal teams who will address you tomorrow. But could I just say, in relation to protection of the unborn, Article 43.3, when a woman dies before her baby is viable, her baby will die too. So the concept of equal right to life in that context becomes a contradiction. In terms legislation, I believe we need to look at, I keep saying, I believe we need to look at taking out the criminality surrounding termination of pregnancy in this country, particularly when it pertains to saving women's life. And we need to be very clear that we can save women's life without fear of being put in jail. This is not about legislating for broad termination of pregnancy, according to a broad degree of category. This is about protecting doctors to save women's lives, to protect women's lives, full stop.
Thank you. Okay. As we've reached the end of our session, if time allowed, may I ask if any of the tribunes want to make any final concluding statements? Which is, no, you're happy enough to conclude? Okay. Can I thank members and witnesses? Sorry. Kamal Ashkill. Just to thank members and in particular thank our witnesses, Dr. Rhona Mahony, Dr. Sam Coulter and Dr. McCaffrey for coming this morning to our presentation and hearings here today. And could I remind members that we stand suspended until 14:45, and if members could return promptly at 14:45, please. Thank you.